everybody, and welcome to Haley's Reading Nook. My name is Haley, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite books from 2021. So to get to my top 10, it was a little bit more difficult than I anticipated. My reading goal last year was 60 books. I reached that in September, and that's not even my biggest reading time. I usually read the most in November and December just because I'm at home and enjoying more cozy weather during those times. So I ended up reading 97 books last year and thought, why not narrow it down to 10 and see which ones are my favorite, which was a lot harder than I anticipated. I had so much fun going back through my list of books and remembering a lot of the books that I read, and it was really difficult to narrow it down to just 10, but I did. Some of them, spoiler alert, they are series of books because I did end up reading quite a few series last year, and I could not just pick one, so I picked my favorite from the series, and I'm still counting the whole series on my list as well, but I'm just kind of highlighting the one that I ended up being like, this one was probably my favorite. So without any further ado, let's get into it and let's see which 10 books I picked for 2021. All right, so we're gonna start with number 10. Number 10, I read in December. I had seen this book on a lot of lists, on a lot of, like, if you like Harry Potter or magical worlds being whisked away, this might be a series for you. And I have only read the first in the series, and it is Nevermore, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This book, oh my goodness, it was so cute, it was so magical. It was found family, which I love that as a theme of a book. And it sparked that, like, I don't know, that magical, like, lovely feeling inside. And I checked it out of the library on my Libby app, which if you don't have, you should definitely get a Libby app. And I immediately wanted to get into the second book, and it was like a 20-week wait. So I am still waiting as of right now, but I'm really excited to get the second book and learn more about these characters and the world. And it's so, like, I just really, really liked all of the characters, and I liked Morgan. To me, it felt kind of like Harry Potter meets the Addams Family, and I love that. Like, Morgan Crow reminds me a little bit of Wednesday Addams, and I love Wednesday Addams. So it was a really fun series, and I'm really glad I read the first one. I don't own it. I want to own it, so one day I will. So number 9 on my list was one that I read in November, and it was called The Killers of the Flower Moon, and it was by David Gran. This book made me so upset, but also it was so interesting. So the full title of this book is The Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI. It's a mouthful, but when I tell you I have not been so mad at a book in a really long time, just at the injustice of the world, this book has stuck with me until now. Like, I can't get it out of my head. I am so tempted to reread it and just kind of really, really like dive deeper into it. I want to own it so that I can like read it and make notes and annotate it, because it was really interesting to read. It's like a real life murder mystery. So The Killers of the Flower Moon is a nonfiction. It is written by an American journalist. His name is David Gran. He went into a lot of the records and was able to like pull a lot of interviews and things like that. And it read as like a fictional story, and you kind of get lost in the world of it. And you're like, wow, like this is crazy. I can't believe this. And then you remember, oh yeah, this is a nonfiction book. It's based in the 1920s, and it was displaced Osage tribe was moved to Oklahoma, and what ended up happening was the way that they structured their deeds to their land, they got the mineral and oil rights. And lo and behold, in Oklahoma in the 1920s, oil was struck. So this tribe went from being displaced and starving and hungry and very, very poor to being the most wealthy group of people in America. And then murder started happening. So that was how kind of the FBI got started, was because they were looking into the murders to see what happened and to figure out what was going on in this community. And when I tell you, I had to take a break from reading for, it was a couple of days, probably a week or two after I finished this book. And it was all that I could talk about, because I was just so mad and so frustrated at just the way that some things were handled, and it's real. And that's what twisted the knife. So very, very interesting, very, very good book. I learned a lot, and sometimes that's really cool and really necessary with reading and with books. So I would actually recommend it, even though it's a frustrating book and it might boil the blood a little bit. I think that it was fascinating, and that I was able to learn quite a bit about U.S. history and some things that we didn't really learn about in school through it. So definitely on my top 10. So number 8 is They Mostly Come Out at Night by Benedict Patrick. These books are also a little bit frustrating, but I'll get to that in a second. So this series, because this is the first in a series, is called the Yarns World series, because each book is like when you knit with yarn, it grows, the blanket or grows, and so like each book is kind of like another notch of knitting. So what's really interesting is that all of the books in the series don't necessarily follow the same characters. And they don't necessarily have the happiest of endings, which is very cool. You don't have too many books that do that. You do have some. I mean, Game of Thrones, and there's Stephen King doesn't always have the best endings. So there are books that have that, but these ones are shorter. So that's kind of nice. So this first one is following a specific realm in the world, and it is following the Magpie King, and we kind of are going through and figuring out what's going on, and there's things that go bump in the night, and it's figuring out what happened. And each chapter also has a story or a fable or just like lore in between it that's about the world that also pertains to the story. So as you're going through the story, you are getting these snippets of folklore that are being dropped into the story, and it's kind of a story about something else, and you don't know what's going on until the end of the book, where it all kind of wraps it up, and you're like, oh, that's why that story was in there. Like, this is a children's story that is kind of talking about deeper and darker things. So I have read 2 in the Yarns World series right now. I believe I have 5 of them. So I have read They Mostly Come Out at Night and The Shadows of the Owl Queen Court, which both follow the same kind of tribe, the Magpie tribe or Magpie King, and then the Owl Queen. And then there are other books, other stories that follow different characters in Yarns World. So I have those, and those are on my list to read this year because I just really enjoyed these books. They pull on a lot of folklore of the United Kingdoms and also of like Native American tribes and like I think First Nation. So they pull, the author Benedict Patrick has kind of done some research into these different areas and been able to pull some of that folklore into its own world, which is kind of spooky. It's actually a very spooky type of world. I will say I really appreciated reading these on like rainy nights and like during the fall. Okay, so number 7 is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book was a warm hug when I needed it. It just was such a feel good. It was so cute and it was so lovely, and it was exactly what I needed when the world was kind of blowing up a little bit. This was one of our book club picks this year. I think I actually picked it. And in my book club, we actually, when we're able to meet in person, because we haven't been able to all the time, but when we feel a little bit more safe and we're able to meet safely in person, we do. And we actually dress up to match the book if we can. And sometimes we'll have themed food or drinks that match up with the book. So when I hosted, I actually had one of the meals that they kind of dictated in the books, which was before one of the characters left. And I brought back all of the foods that were kind of mentioned in that scene, and we each dressed up as our favorite character from the book, and it just was really fun. I dressed up as Chauncey. I have a bellhop hat, and it was really fun. It just was a blast, and I have a lot of really good memories associated with this book because it was one of the times we were actually all able to see each other, and that in and of itself is really nice and special. So yeah, The House in the Cerulean Sea was number 7. So my number 6 book is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This book was super thought-provoking. It was a deep book. I've actually had a couple conversations with different people who have read this one. I know I've talked with my mom about it. She's read it. I think she read it for her book club. And I know it was on a couple of different of the subscription sites. So I've seen this one on the Book of the Month before I was a Book of the Month subscriber, which I am now a Book of the Month subscriber. And I also saw it on, there's the Once Upon a Book Club, which I was a subscriber for a little bit too. And then I realized I wasn't reading the books that I was getting in, and I cut it off for a little bit so I could read some of the books that were just accumulating on my shelf. And I missed this one. And this was one that I wanted to read. I had been hearing that it was super thought-provoking and that it was like a really nice tale about second chances and kind of learning what you wanted to do with your life. And it was just really, it was a heartwarming book. Like, I went into it not really knowing what it was going to be about, and I left really thinking about it. And even now, I read it in February of last year, I believe, and I still, whenever people are like, oh, what book really made you think last year? I'm like, The Midnight Library. So this one, I just really enjoyed it. I thought that it was a really nice story, and it was really interesting to see what happens when you're given the choice to look at what you would do if you could change the circumstances that you have been into at this point. So like, what would you do if you could go back and make a different choice, would you? And for me, that was just really interesting to see kind of play out and be like, no, I wouldn't change this, and why not? And so, yeah, if you're looking for like a thought-provoking, really nice, kind of heartwarming, kind of adventurous, a little bit in there, I would suggest this book. Yeah, it just was, it opened my eyes to a couple of things. So this is a good one. So my number 5 book was Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez. This was one of the romances that I read this year. It was such a nice love story. It had a lot of really good bi representation. So this year I tried to read a couple more books on different spectrums. So I was reading quite a bit more like LGBTQA+ books. I was reading a lot of books from different cultures, and just trying to really bring in a lot more than what I have been used to, which is some of the older ones and a lot of white authors. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go a little bit out of this zone and see if like what else is out there. And so I looked on a lot of like Bookstagram and BookTube channels that were kind of promoting these other books, and one of the books was Perfect on Paper, and it was adorable. Oh my goodness. It was a young adult love story, romance, and the main character is bisexual, which is, love that. And it was just that she was taking notes were being put into a locker, and she was answering the notes and giving love advice, even though she was not really secure in her own love life. So it just was really a really cute story. And then somebody finds out that it's her and blackmails her to help him get back with his ex-girlfriend. So it's all in all an adorable story. It really made me like the characters. There were some times, don't get me wrong, where you're like, no, why would you do this? But that's also kind of a fun part of not only young adult, but also romance stories, of being like, no, like, open your eyes. So it just was, it was a really nice story, and it was a really, it was really cute, and I really want to own that one too. If I remember, I really liked the cover of that one. It should be right here. It was a good one. If you're looking for a really good, feel-good, young adult, kind of more of an innocent, lovely story, then I would say perfect on paper. I think it also has a swimmer in it. Yeah, the main, or one of the love interests is a swimmer. And if you don't know, I was a swimmer all the way up until college. So that's always fun. That's always fun for me. The fourth book, so this is into my top 4, which these are kind of interchangeable with each other. I mean, they're all interchangeable, but these are kind of just like maybe like a half step up from the other ones. Number 4 was Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This book was so good. Oh my goodness. It had a lot. Like, it was a multiple viewpoint, so we've got a lot of different viewpoints in the story. It was more of like there was a lot of action in it. It was a pre-colonialization Americas, so there was a lot more of there was different folklore than I have read before, which is always fun. So there's not like all of like the technology. It's a lot of like boats and the different gods and different elements, and oh my goodness, it was just so good. And the first half of it is a lot of world building. It's a lot of getting to know the characters and kind of understanding, but all of the characters, there were 4 viewpoints in the story. All of the characters were trying to get to a specific place for a specific event. And so there's like this there's ticking in your head. You're like, they got to get there. What's going to happen if they don't get there? And the first half of the book is a lot of like exposition and a lot more of like kind of understanding what's going on and backstory to these different characters. And the second half is just like everything breaks loose. And the ending is chaos. I have never felt more shocked on a cliffhanger than in Black Sun. The second book, Fevered Star, comes out this year, and I am chomping at the bit to get this book because, oh my goodness, the way that they ended, I was in shock. I sat there. The audiobook, because I listened to this one, I got it also from the library. The audiobook ended, and I just remember sitting there and being like, what happened? I need to know. And then I looked up the next book, and it didn't come out until 2022. So it was really good. It was it's fantasy. It had a lot of twists and turns. I will say that there were a couple characters I liked more than other characters, but I'm really interested to see what happens with all of our leads in the next story, to see where they kind of go to, because that cliffhanger, oof, it got me. It got me. The number 3 on my list is not actually a fiction book. This is the one I guess there was another nonfiction, which is The Killers of the Flower Moon. But this was more of a memoir type of book, and it was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankel. It's an old book. this will be the oldest book. It is from 1946, and Viktor E. Frankel is a psychologist. He's a doctor, so Dr. Frankel. And this book, it was actually pretty emotional. Dr. Frankel was a survivor of the Holocaust. So the book goes into a lot of detail about what he went through and about his time in the camps, but from kind of the viewpoint of a psychologist. And it deals a lot with finding the meaning in life, but through being like positive and being able to have compassion for other people in dire circumstances and understanding other people. And one of the more like fascinating aspects was that those that banded together and those that looked out for each other were more likely to survive in these circumstances. The way that I actually decided to read this book in the first place is kind of interesting. So I'm a subscriber to a YouTube channel called Cinema Therapy. I love them. So I watch pretty much every one of their videos. I think there's like 2 I haven't seen. And one of them that they were kind of doing a deep dive into. So they're like 2 best friends. The channel is 2 best friends. One is a therapist. One of the men is a therapist, and one of the men is a movie director. And they're both they're renowned in their fields and everything. And they watch a lot of movies together, and they go in kind of with the cinema side of it, so they're able to kind of talk about like why the film director made the choices that they did and what the different things mean. And then they also go in from a psychology point of view, or therapeutic point of view, and talk about kind of what might be going on with the characters and what it means. So the series or the movie that they were watching and kind of depicting or dissecting was Hunger Games with Katniss Everdeen. So they equated a lot of her compassion and things like that to this book as well. So the therapist of the pair was like, if you haven't read this book, then I highly suggest. So I'm like, you know what? I'm a reader. I'm going to go pick it up. So it was available in my library, and I listened to it. And it was pretty short. It was like a 5-hour audiobook. And it was just, it was emotional. It was about compassion. It was about humanity in one of the darkest periods that we have learned about. I mean, there are other very dark periods in our history, but one that we have learned quite a bit about, and just being able to see from the perspective of a survivor of the Holocaust, and that he was not only a survivor but also a doctor, and able to kind of take a step back and be like, this is what this means and this is why. So it does, the first half is much more about his experiences, and the second half is much more about kind of like the science behind everything, and like what is it, the psychotherapeutic method is kind of where he's going into more. But definitely, like, it was a good read. I would suggest it as a really good, like, non-fiction, more of an autobiography-ish with a bit of science in there. Yes. It is older. It is an older book. And he's a very, very famous scientist or psychologist. All right, so on to things that aren't as tragic. I promise I didn't read just books that made me mad and made me think this year. One of my favorite trilogy of books that I have read is actually a romance trilogy. I heard about this from a booktuber. Her name is Jess Owens. And it is called it's the Brown Sisters series, and it is 3 books. It is by Talia Hibbert. I apologize if I get any names wrong. I'm trying. But all 3 books are about a different sister. And they were so good. They were some of the best love stories I've ever read. So the Brown Sisters is 3 women. They're all Black women, and they are English, so over in England. The first book is about one of the Brown sisters. Her name is Chloe Brown, and she has a chronic pain, so chronic pain illness, and has a near-death experience and is like, you know what, I need to get out there and I need to live my life. So it's about her kind of taking the reins of living her life and making a list. So if you like list making, so she makes a list and then she's like, I need to check all of these things off, and that means that I've lived a life. And it was adorable. And there are some steamy scenes, so there is a little bit of smut in it as well. It is an adult romance book. But yeah, it deals with a lot of different people, has a lot of different communities that are shown, and has really good representation of some different areas. The second one, which is the Take a Hint, Danny Brown, is about the second sister, and she is a little bit more, I don't know, she's just more like sassy and has this kind of flirtation with this man in her building that she works, and he is they end up faking a relationship, so it's a faked relationship, and it's another really cute one. And then the third one, which was my favorite, which was the actor age Eve Brown, was the third sister, the youngest sister. She gets cut off and is told that she needs to grow up and start doing other things with her life, making a living, and she decides that she's gonna go apply for a job somewhere. So she goes off and goes to the first place that she sees and is like, I want to work here, and the person who is working there is like, absolutely not, I don't think so. And she ends up hitting him with her car and then works there to help because he can't work anymore. So it just was, the whole series, I really love the whole family. I really, really want to know what happens to them. I was so invested in all of their relationships and everything. And it just was it was such a great trilogy of love stories, and I would highly recommend if you want some good love stories. Yeah. But there are some scenes. I will say there are some scenes that are a little bit more adult, which that's okay. That's fine. We love it. So the last entry on my 10 books, which it's a little bit more than 10, but that's fine, is The City of Brass in the Devabad trilogy, which honestly the whole trilogy is fantastic, by S.A. Chakraborty, which if I did not pronounce that correctly, I'm really sorry. I'm not the best at pronunciation or names, unfortunately. But it's set in 18th century Cairo, and Nahari is the main character. She is a young woman, and she is a bit of a con artist. And she performs some ceremonies and does some other things and helps out with an apothecary, and she can speak a lot of languages, which is really cool. And she starts speaking specific language during a ceremony, during an event, and summons a magical being and kind of gets taken on an adventure from there. So they travel to a magical city, and there's magic and mystery and politics. There's quite a bit of politics because it's a lot of world building, and you just get to learn a lot of this, like, it's like a Middle Eastern mythologies. It's just, it's so good. Oh my goodness. I really liked Nari. I really liked her as a main character just because she is a bit of a con artist. She is a bit of a liar here and there, and that's always fun when you have a bit of a naive prince that she meets. So it turned into a really fantastic series. I finished all 3 of them. I just really liked the first book because it's the entrance into this magical world, and the world building was really great. And it made me want to like go visit, but also not visit because there was a lot going on. And the writing was just really beautiful as well. So I really liked the whole series. I would definitely recommend it to you if you kind of like that more like science fiction, fantasy type of books with a little bit of romance sprinkled in there. But seeing who could wield their political power the best is always fascinating. But that concludes my top 10. I do have an honorable mention. At the very end of the year, I finished reading The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. This one was also just an incredible book. I had heard nothing but good things about this book, and I finally read it at the very, very end of the year. I think I finished it on like December 30th or something. And it was, honestly, it lived up to the expectation. It lived up to all of the praise that it had gotten. I really liked how they jumped back and forth between kind of time periods and learning about the darkness, the devil that makes deals with people for their souls is always a good storyline. So 10 out of 10. I really, really loved it. All right, well, that wraps up my top 10 books of 2021. I hope that you guys might have gotten some suggestions or some ideas of books that maybe you want to read. I always love getting recommendations and suggestions. That's actually how I ended up reading most of my top 10 books of 2021. So if you have any good books, make sure to put them down below and I will definitely check them out. I am going to be back soon with some more content on book-related things. And if you liked this video, make sure to hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe. I am going to be back hopefully sooner rather than later with some more bookish content. And until the next video, I will catch you later. Bye. I'm gonna take a drink of my water in my coffee mug. I'm gonna put this down. Hopefully the dogs don't come and take a drink of that, because that would be interesting. No. Oh, I knew he was gonna do that. He drank my water. Marty.